We are on Aleph and Beis 11b, and we're discussing the Jewish midwives, who we established are either mother and daughter, Yocheved and Miriam. That seems to be the accepted view, considering that yesterday we quoted a Mishnaic text that supports this view. And the other view is that it is mother and daughter-in-law, Aaron's wife, Elisheva, and her mother-in-law, Yocheved. We discussed a little bit how Pharaoh instructed them to kill the males. And we also discussed how he gave them insight into knowing when the women are giving birth, right? Their knees become cold like stone, as well as insight into knowing when it's male versus when it's female, if the face is, when the baby emerges, whether it's face down or face up. And now we get into their refusal to comply with his demands. So the verse reads, we're right over here. And the midwives feared God, they're the fear of heaven, which in and of itself, the Gemara doesn't discuss this, but in and of itself is an incredible lesson in this idea of the fear of heaven. The fear of heaven is often seen as a burden that one takes upon themselves. You know, if I don't have the fear of heaven, I do whatever I want. And then if I have the fear of heaven, now I have to do what God wants. But in reality, as we see in this verse here, it's actually liberating. Considering that they had the fear of heaven, that is why the next line of the verse, they were able to refuse Pharaoh's command. Considering that they had the fear of heaven and the fear of heaven exclusively, they were freed from all other fear, including the fear of the wrath of Pharaoh. This is a very important idea. I don't remember all the details, but the Baal Shem Tov, right, the Baal Shem Tov founder of Hasidus, said he was orphaned at a very young age from his father. And he said that his father taught him three things. I can't remember the third one, but two out of the three one was love every Jew. The third one I can't remember. And the other one was fear nothing but God alone. It's a very simple statement, fear nothing but God alone. You know, and in some ways it's all of Judaism. But to actually live that, fear nothing but God alone, means even when Pharaoh is decreeing to do something, it doesn't matter, I fear God alone. It's an incredible, incredible idea. I'm going to finish this line, the Gemara's comment, and I'll say something else, to say a story that kind of demonstrates this point. Okay, so the verse reads, and the midwives feared God, and they did not do that which Pharaoh told them. Now, the way the verse says that which Pharaoh told them is the word alehen. The Gemara asks, lahen miboyale. It should have said that which he commanded them. Why is there the aleph before, which implies that which he commanded upon them? So it's not that the sentence doesn't flow, it's just that it could have been written more simply. They didn't listen to that which Pharaoh commanded them. Why they did not listen to that which Pharaoh commanded upon them? Alehem, this little aleph here, this prefix turning it to upon them. So therefore the Gemara comments, Rabbi son of Chanina says, Nalama, this teaches us that he wanted to come upon them. He demanded to be intimate with them, physically intimate with them. So aleihan, he commanded himself upon them. When they didn't give in. So now we learn that their refusal is not just a refusal to not kill the Jewish babies, which one could argue is, Pharaoh's not present, Pharaoh's not there, and they can lie about, they like, for example, we're going to learn in a moment, as you mentioned, Alan, yesterday, that they claimed that the Jews are like wild animals who don't need midwives to give birth. So they may have, tried to sneak out of it. But here there's a clear refusal. Pharaoh is saying, I want to be intimate with you, and they're saying no. It's not just them, hiding behind his back and trying to get out of it in some sort of sneaky fashion. Straight up refusal of Pharaoh's advances. And this is only because, of the opening of the verse is, they had the fear of God upon them. So to this end, I wanted to share the story. I'm not sure if I shared the story here at this class. I believe I did. Anyway, there's a famous story with the previous Rebbe. The previous Chabad Rebbe, of course, was Rebbe in Russia under Soviet rule, where there was religious persecution. And he himself, at one point, was sentenced to death by the Russians for his counter-revolutionary activities, trying to keep Judaism alive, which of course is counter-revolutionary, counter-communist. And eventually, through miracles, his sentence was commuted, and eventually he was banished from Russia. And that's why he eventually, some years later, decade later, ended up in the States. At any rate, earlier on, at some point, he was arrested and taken in for interrogation by the Soviets. And they're interrogating him, and he wouldn't comply. Most of the people who interrogated him were actually Jews who became fervent communists and anti-religious. And they're interrogating him in Russian, obviously, and he responded in Yiddish because he knew they knew Yiddish. He was trying to make a point that I'm not afraid of you. Like this verse is saying, they feared God and he's not afraid of them. At any rate, so he's not really cooperating. And at one point, one of the interrogators takes out a gun and says, Rebbe, this toy makes lots of people talk. Makes lots of people talk. I think I shared the story. I'm not sure. Anyway, so he tells them, you're right. That toy makes lots of people talk, meaning the gun. But the toy only makes people talk if they have multiple gods and one world. So if you have multiple gods in one world, then a gun is threatening to your entire existence. Because as soon as a person is shot, his world and all of his gods collapse. But for me, says the previous Rebbe, I have two worlds and one God. And for me, therefore, that toy does not scare me. This is what these women are saying. We fear God. We have one God. We're not impressed by anything else, not by a Pharaoh and not by a glitzy, beautiful home in Hampstead. We're not impressed by either of them. We have one God, and that's who we serve, and nothing else impresses us. And therefore, you, Pharaoh, want to come onto us? No. You want us to kill the baby boys? No. It means you're going to kill us? So be it. It's a very, very powerful lesson. And it's freeing. Frees us from all the other, quote unquote gods we have in our life. Social pressure, money, status, all kinds of different gods that we create for ourselves. If we have the fear of one God, all that falls away. And even the Pharaoh can't make his advances. So that in of itself is like a Farbrengen and inspiration on its own. Okay. The Gemara continues. The verse reads, as we just read, that they had the fear of God upon them, and therefore they did not do as Pharaoh instructed, refusing his advances. And then the verse continues, and they kept alive the males. So the verse specifically states that they kept the males alive, as opposed to saying, and they didn't kill the boys. Pharaoh's instruction was, kill the males. So the refusal to that instruction should have just been, and they didn't kill the boys. But that's not what the verse says. The verse says, they kept alive the males, as if it's not just a negative that they didn't kill, but there's a positive in that they kept them alive. And therefore the Gemara continues. Tana, this we have been taught in the Mishnaic age text. Not only not only did they not kill the males, but they would provide for them, for these baby boys, mayim, water, and food. So not only did they not kill the boys, but they actually kept them alive, providing for them, feeding them, and I suppose helping the women also hide them. So not just like, okay, we're going to refuse, but we'll stand down and let whatever happen, but rather they actually actively were engaged in keeping these boys alive, knowing that Pharaoh is after them. Okay, so now we get to something that Alan, you mentioned yesterday. So 2 verses later, right? Actually, let's look at the flow of verses here because it's going to become important going forward. So here we're looking at the verses. This is Exodus, Shmois, chapter 1. So we can back up a little bit to see what we discussed already after the harsh slavery in chapter 13 and 14. Then it says in 15, now the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one who was named Shifra and the second who was named Pua. We discussed that at length. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew woman and you see them on the birth stool, that's that word, avnoim, birth stool. If it is a son, you shall put him to death, but if it is a daughter, she may live. The midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them. This we just discussed. Spoken to them is an allusion to Pharaoh trying to make advances. But they enabled the boys to live, as we just commented, but they didn't just not kill the boys, but they actually gave them life. Now here's the verse that's missing in the Gemara. The Gemara goes straight to commenting on verse 19 after commenting on verse 17 and doesn't discuss verse 18, which is why I'm looking at the text here so we can see the flow. So the verse reads, so the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing that you have enabled the boys to live? And in response to that, and the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are skilled as midwives. When the midwife has not yet come to them, they have already given birth. Okay? So their excuse is that we're not needed. We would love to fulfill your command. They're obviously hiding the fact that they were actually keeping the baby boys alive and telling Pharaoh, look, by the time we get there, the boys are already born and we don't have a chance to kill them. So that's this verse here. And the midwife said, El Pare to Pare, Kiloi Kanoshim V'gomer, for not like Egyptian women are the Hebrew women. Before we get there, they've already given birth. Now the word used for midwives, right? That's what we read here. Sorry. What we read here in English is that because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are skilled as midwives. This word midwives in Hebrew is chayos. Chayos. Chayos literally means like living ones. Living, like the word chay. So chayos, living ones. So midwives in Hebrew are called chayos because they bring life into this world. So they're like called living ones. But there are other things called living ones. In other words, like animals. Animals are also called chayos, living ones. So the Gemara asks as follows. My chayos, what does the verse mean when it says that the Jewish women are like chayos, which we translated as midwives? So ilema, if we are to say chayos mamish, we mean actual midwives, that the Jewish women are all like midwives. The Gemara asks, Atu chaya milay tzricha chaya? Does a midwife herself not also need a midwife? How does the fact that they are midwives help us? Midwives who give birth also need midwives to deliver their babies. When you're busy delivering your own baby, it's hard to be the midwife too. So what does the fact that they are midwives mean? So therefore there must be another meaning to this word chayos, not just midwives as we read in the simple translation, but something else is being alluded to here. As the Gemara says here, sorry, I didn't finish the sentence. Does a midwife not need another midwife to help her give birth? So how does it help the fact that they are like midwives? Therefore, says the Gemara, the word chayos, which means midwives, also has another translation, as we just mentioned earlier, also means animals. The root word of chayos again means living. So livingness could be a midwife who brings life into this world, or living beings, living creatures, namely animals. Ella, rather, therefore, going with the other translation. Amrulai, the midwife said to him, to Pharaoh, Umazu, this nation, the Jewish people, kachaya nimshala, they are compared to animals. And here we reference the blessings that Yaakov gives to his children, to the tribes. And in a number of them, he refers to them metaphorically as animals. And here the Gemara cites the examples. Yehuda, the tribe of Yehuda, is referred to by Yaakov as Gur Aryeh, the lion. Dan, the tribe of Dan, is compared to Yehuda Nachash. Dan is like a snake. Naphtali, the tribe of Naphtali, is referred to as Ayala Shalucha, the deer. Yisachar, the tribe of Yisachar, is compared to Chamor Garam, compared to a donkey. Yosef, the tribe of Yosef, is compared to Bechor Shor, compared to an ox. Binyamin, the tribe of Binyamin, is compared to Ze'ev Yitroif, a fox. So we see already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Half of the tribes are referred to explicitly by their father as animals, metaphorically. And the Gemara then comments, what about the other 6? So the Ksivbe of those tribes about which the verse explicitly states, comparing them to animals, Ksivbe. Okay, so the verse says that they're compared to animals, all is good. But the Loi Ksivbe, those about whom the verse doesn't explicitly say that they are compared to a specific animal, Ksiv, it says, with regard to all the Jewish people, in the book of Yecheskel, I believe. Yep, the book of Yecheskel, book of Ezekiel, where there it says, Ma imach lavi bein arayos ravza. Your mother is like a lion crouching amongst the lions. Lavi is another word for lion, or I think maybe lioness. So all the Jewish people were compared to a lion. And therefore, the midwives tell Pharaoh, they're like animals in the wild. They give birth without any assistance, just like animals giving birth in the wild without any assistance. And therefore, we miss the opportunity to fulfill your command and actually kill them. So this is their response. Now, it'd be interesting to just understand a basic question. If the Gemara brings a verse which compares all the Jewish people to animals, to a lion, why then begin with the specifics of these 6, Yehuda, Dan, Naphtali, Yisachar, Yosef, and Benjamin? Just go straight to the main verse, which says all Jews are like lions. So obviously there's something about these 6 and the animals they are compared to that's relevant to this discussion about midwives helping the Jewish people give birth in the times of exile. And I wonder what the deeper meaning of this might mean. So the floor is always open. I'm just pointing that out. Like the Gemara has a verse which already compares all the Jewish people to animals. Why then give the specific ones for only half? Just putting that out there. Okay, one more line. Now the next verse, let's go back to our Chumash here. So after the midwives say that for they are skilled as midwives, or as we learned in the Gemara, they're like animals in the wild, the word for midwives being chayos, which also means animals. And therefore, when the midwives have not yet come, meaning before we arrive there, they already gave birth. So verse 20 reads, God benefited the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. Continues verse 21. Now it took place when the midwives feared God, and he made houses for them. Okay, so what does made houses for them mean? You know, literal homes would be quite the miracle if God just made actual homes arrive. So let's see how Rashi comments what the word houses mean. So, as Rashi tells us, it means the houses of the priesthood, the Levitic family, and the royal family, which are called houses. In other words, houses don't mean literally physical homes, but houses mean like, you know, like when you refer to a dynasty by the house, you know, like I think the current queen is the House of Windsor. I think that's what they are. You know, so a family name can also be referred to as a house. And that's what the Gemara comments over here. And Rashi's comment that we just saw comes from the Gemara.
You could also say the House of Lords.
House of Lords, exactly, yes. So house is a metaphor to describe like a
common area.
Sorry?
Specific common area.
Yeah, so like a common, not ancestry, but like an elevated status. Right? A house can be referred to as an elevated status that certain people share, either a group like the House of Lords or a family like the House of Windsor or whatever.
So it's almost like they enshrine them in some sort of remembrance or in perpetuity.
Exactly.
A legacy, I guess.
A legacy. Yeah, a legacy. Yeah. But it's interesting that it works in English and Hebrew. Like Malchus Beis David, the kingdom of the house of David. Base meaning a house. And it works in English too. We describe, what's the word? We describe, lines, genealogical lines of kings as houses. So it works both in English and Hebrew. So let's see how the Gemara says it.
Weren't these houses special houses where they were the kids were put into the walls?
That's the physical homes, yeah. But here the Gemara seems, the verse says that God made houses for them. We'd be very hard pressed to say that God made actual physical houses for them. First of all, why didn't they have houses till now? and all of a sudden, poof, miraculously a house arrives, that would be a huge like miracle that other Jews should have seen. Like, look at this. These houses just arrived. That should have blown the minds of everybody. And there's no
It's
comment
like
like that. So the Gemara seems to understand that it's not that we're taking it out of the literal meaning, but the literal meaning itself is not physical, right? The literal meaning of Beis David, the kingdom of the house of David, doesn't mean literally his palace. It means his genealogical line, that's the house of David. So we're still keeping it literal, but not physical. Anyway, sorry, what were you saying, Robert?
I'm saying it's like when yeshivots are created, they're referred to as houses of study,
Exactly.
and by the name of the founder usually. So
Yes, right. Yes, that's correct. That's right. Yes. So we'll have like Debei Rav, the house of Rav. It means the study hall of Rav. Yes. Yes, correct.
it's like giving a respect or honor to the
Exactly.
founder.
Exactly. So it's a status thing. All right. So what kind of status? So we saw in Rashi over here in his comment on the verse that it's two things, the Levitic family and the royal family. Now, as we're going to see in the Gemara here, that's actually two different opinions. Rashi combines it in his commentary on the Chumash. So let's see that. So the verse says, the verse says, Vayi ki yiru hamiyal, this is like now it was when the midwives feared God, Vayas lahem batim, and God made for them houses. So the Gemara discusses Rav and Shmuel. Again, our two commentaries that we've been discussing quite a bit. The first one being literal meaning, and the second one being the context. And I'd like to see how that plays out here. So Chad Amar, one says, the first one, Rav, the one who is looking at the literal meaning, he says, Bate Kohuna v'Levia, houses of the Kohanite houses and the houses of the Levites, right? So Yocheved and Miriam are obviously from the house of, the Kohen comes from Aaron, and the Levites certainly are the Levites because they are the family of Levites. But as we're going to see in a moment, Miriam married Kalev. And Kalev himself also becomes a Kohen. Right? So they have the houses of Kohen and Levi in their line as a result of this. And the Chadam, the other opinion is, Shmuel, who takes the context, is Bate Malchus, houses of kings. And we're going to learn because Miriam married Kalev, and eventually we're going to see that King David comes from the line of Miriam. We're going to learn about that tomorrow. Yeah, so I'm going to stop over here because the Gemara tomorrow we're going to look at exactly how we have Cohen and Levi and how we have the houses of David coming from Yocheved and Miriam. But I just want to put out there, so we talked about how Rav and Shmuel discussed context versus literal. The first one being literal and the second one being context. And perhaps here's the literal and context. Miriam and Yocheved are literally part of the Kohen and Levite family. And therefore we could say, on the literal level, that the reason why they were blessed to be the Kohen and Levites is because of what Miriam and Yocheved had done, not killing the Jewish males, especially since they actually kept Moshe alive. They actually physically kept the line of the Levites alive. But in the context, maybe it's better to say that they got houses of sovereignty because they refused a sovereignty. Like they because they feared God, so they took upon themselves the sovereignty of God rather than the sovereignty of Pharaoh, and therefore they were rewarded measure for measure in the larger context of our Gemara here. Therefore, they were rewarded with sovereignty. Perhaps that's what's going on here.
I feel very bad for Miriam.
How's that?
She was such a leader, such a tremendous leader for the women. She was such an inspiration.
Yeah.
She worked through the midwives. And then she was in the lineage of David, right? She started it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, her son gets killed for trying to do, or gets killed trying to do some good for God.
Yeah, we're gonna see. Yeah. When the Gemara gets into how the genealogy of Miriam as an ancestor of David, the Gemara is going to start talking about her and her relationship to Kalev, and you're going to learn more to feel bad about for her. But you're going to see her righteousness even more as we go along, actually.
Yeah.
So you are definitely correct there. But it's interesting that for the feminine aspect of this, and that even though both kings and Cohen and Levies go by father, right? A person's a Cohen if their father's a Cohen, and a person can only
Right.
become king if their father was a king. And yet it's all
Mhm.
started by two women.
That's right.
Quite interesting. Getting back to our theme we talked about before, that the women's self-sacrifice in raising the next generation is really what gives even the males their identity as whatever it is they're going to become. We
Exactly.
talked about before that because of their self-sacrifice, therefore their children were the first ones to recognize God at the sea. So here too, the line of David and the line of the Kohens, even though it's a even though it's a patrilineal line, it's still the house begins as the house of Miriam and Yocheved, which is quite
That's
interesting.
right.
It's
Yeah.
quite interesting as we're going
It's
to learn more tomorrow.
It's
Yeah.
interesting too that when you mention the tribes and the animal referring to that tribe,
Yeah.
that the tribe of Levi wasn't included in that list. You would think it would be, considering you're deriving something
Right.
from the tribe of Levi into this house of.
Interesting. Was the house of was Levi referred to as an animal in any of the blessings? I don't remember. I don't think so.
No, I wasn't. Not from the list
No.
you recited.
No, I'm saying even in scripture, I don't think it's.
I don't know.
I don't think so. Yaakov says Shimon and Levi Achim. Shimon and Levi are brothers because they defended Dinah's honor and they killed the town of Shechem, right? I don't remember referring to them as animals though. Anyway, God willing, more tomorrow on Miriam as an ancestor of King David and an ancestor of the Kohanic line, and her relationship with Kalev and some of the things that she dealt with in her life. And it's gonna add more to Alan's sentiment about her self-sacrifice and dedication.
And Shimshon also.
Sorry?
And Shimshon.
Yeah,
I think they
similar.
both.
It's gonna be a similar kind of thing. Well, in some ways, it's gonna be quite similar. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have to put up with. Okay, wonderful day, everybody.
Wait. I just
sorry,
had a
Robert.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. When we spoke about Pharaoh and he had counsel with Yov.
Yeah. Yov, Yisro, and.
Right. I think I came across in last week's Parsha, Shalach, there was a commentary that Yov was mentioned. He was mentioned in the commentary
Eov is mentioned.
that he had, I'm sorry?
Eov, yeah.
Yeah, it was mentioned that he had passed away during the time the spies were scouting out the land. I know we had no historical reference, I think, for Yov, but I think that place.
People sent me a list of a number of different sources as to where exactly they place him, whether
Well,
earlier
I just
or
thought
later.
thought that was interesting. It gives some historical context to Yov.
So that would be consistent with the Gemara's view here, that he was present with Pharaoh.
Right.
And then I guess the trials of his suffering would be after that, before he dies at the end, when the spies, or sometime later when the spies go in. I haven't seen that commentary, but that's an interesting note. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day,
See
everybody.
you tomorrow.
God willing.
Good day.
Okay.